The howling wind cut through Emma Wilson's thin woolen shawl like it wasn't even there. She clutched her son Timmy closer, shielding his small body from the relentless cold as they huddled against the wall of the abandoned barn. Her fingers, red and nearly numb, trembled as she stroked his hair. Outside, the snow was falling faster now, accumulating in drifts that would soon be impossible to traverse. Her breath formed ghosts in the frigid air as she whispered empty promises that everything would be all right. But as night approached and the temperature plummeted, Emma faced a truth as bitter as the Dakota winter itself. They would not survive another night like this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She pressed a protective hand to her swollen belly, feeling the child within stir. "Just hold on," she whispered, though whether to herself, Timmy, or her unborn baby, she wasn't sure anymore. The marks of her brother-in-law's wagon wheels still scarred the snow outside, leading away from their abandonment and toward the warmth and safety that had been denied to them. It was in that moment of utter despair that she saw them. Shadows, moving through the blizzard, tall figures on horseback emerging like spirits from the white void, and among them a man whose presence commanded the storm itself to part before him. The simple pine coffin looked small against the vast expanse of winter-white prairie. Emma Wilson stood rigidly beside it, her gloved hand clutching her son Timmy's small fingers too tightly. The 4-year-old whimpered, but she couldn't bring herself to loosen her grip. It was as if by holding on to him, she could prevent the world from stealing anything more from her. Robert had died 3 days ago. Pneumonia, they said. His cough had started as nothing, a minor irritation blamed on the dust from the fall harvest. By the time it transformed into the wet, rattling sound that haunted Emma's dreams, it was too late. The nearest doctor was in Rivercross, 2 days' ride away. The snow had started falling the night Robert's fever spiked. By morning, she was a widow. Now she stood in the biting cold, watching as William Wilson, her father-in-law, hammered the final nail into his son's coffin with mechanical precision. His face remained impassive, weathered like tanned leather and just as unyielding. Beside him, Thomas, Robert's older brother, shifted impatiently, periodically glancing at the sky as if personally offended by the snow that had begun to fall again. "That's the last of it," William announced, his voice as grey as the winter sky. "Best get back before this storm worsens." Emma nodded numbly, her mind still unable to process that the wooden box before her contained the man she had loved since she was 17, the man who had promised her a life of their own in this rugged territory, the father of her children, both Timmy and the unborn baby whose arrival was only 2 months away. Daniel, the youngest Wilson brother, stepped forward awkwardly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, he began, but Thomas cut him off with a sharp look. "Time to go," Thomas declared, already turning toward the wagons. "Weather's getting worse." Emma took one final look at the grave, a dark wound in the white landscape, before allowing herself to be guided toward the waiting wagons. Robert was buried on the edge of their property, near the old oak tree where they had often sat during the warmer months, planning their future. The ride back to the homestead was silent, save for the creaking of the wagon wheels and Timmy's occasional sniffles. Emma stared blankly at the passing landscape, her mind empty of everything except the most basic thoughts. One foot in front of the other. Breathe in, breathe out. It wasn't until they reached the small cluster of buildings that made up Pinewood Homestead that she noticed something was wrong. Thomas and William had begun unloading supplies from all the wagons, not just their own, piling crates and sacks near the main house. "What's happening?" Emma asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears after hours of silence. William didn't look at her as he continued working. "We're heading south. My brother's got land near the Missouri border. Better prospects there. Emma blinked, trying to make sense of his words. When will you return? This time it was Thomas who answered, his tone matter of fact. We won't. This place is done for. But this is our home, Emma protested, instinctively tightening her hold on Timmy. Robert and I built this place. Our life is here. Robert's gone, Thomas said bluntly. And this land belongs to the Wilson family. Always has. The cold that seeped into Emma's bones had nothing to do with the weather. You're leaving us behind, she stated, the reality of their intention becoming horribly clear. William finally turned to face her, his expression hardened against any appeal. You're with child, can barely work the fields now, and won't be able to at all soon. The boy's too young to be any help. We can't carry dead weight where we're going. Dead weight, Emma echoed, the words landing like physical blows. I can still work. I can... Decisions made, William interrupted. Daniel's left you some. Supplies in the storage shed. Should last you until the weather breaks enough to make it to Rivercross. Emma looked desperately toward Daniel, who stood slightly apart, his gaze fixed firmly on the ground. Daniel, please, she whispered. The youngest Wilson brother finally looked up, guilt flashing across his features. But before he could speak, Thomas stepped between them. Don't waste your breath, he said coldly. We've got our own families to think about. Emma felt her knees weaken, and she stumbled slightly before catching herself on the wagon's edge. Robert would never have allowed this, she said, her voice breaking. Robert's not here to stop it, Thomas replied. His hand moved to rest meaningfully on the handle of his pistol. Not quite a threat, but a clear message that arguments were finished. Timmy began to cry, sensing his mother's distress. Emma gathered him into her arms, lifting him despite the protest of her aching back. She would not beg, she would not break, not in front of these men. The shed door sticks in the cold, Daniel said quietly. You need to lift it while pushing. It was the only advice, the only kindness he could offer under his father and brother's watchful eyes. Emma nodded once, a jerky movement that spoke of tightly controlled emotion. Then she turned and walked stiffly toward the small cabin she had shared with Robert, Timmy's face buried against her neck. Behind her, she heard the men continue loading the wagons, their voices low but unconcerned, as if they hadn't just sentenced a pregnant woman and young child to likely death. Inside the cabin, Emma moved mechanically, gathering what she could. Blankets, Robert's old hunting knife, the small wooden horse he had carved for Timmy's last birthday. The cabin offered little protection against the coming night. The firewood would last perhaps 2 days if she was frugal. The food in the pantry was gone, cleared out by the Wilson men. By sunset, they were gone. Emma stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching as the wagon train disappeared into the swirling snow. Beside her, Timmy clutched his wooden horse, his small face solemn with a child's understanding that something terrible had happened. Where did they go, Mama? He asked, his voice small against the rising wind. Emma swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. Away, she answered simply. But we'll be all right. The words rang hollow in the empty yard. She was 5 months pregnant, with a 4-year-old son, minimal supplies, and winter closing in around them. The nearest settlement was miles away, across open prairie, a journey impossible in her condition with the weather worsening by the hour. They would not be all right. But she couldn't tell Timmy that. That night, as Timmy slept fitfully beside her, Emma stared into the small fire she had carefully built. Outside, the wind had become a living thing, howling around the corners of the cabin, finding every crack and seam to send icy fingers through. The storm that had threatened all day had arrived in full force. Emma placed another precious log on the fire, watching as the flames licked around it. Her hand drifted to her belly, feeling the baby move within her, Robert's child. A child who might never draw breath in this world if she couldn't find a way to survive the winter. "I won't let them win," she whispered fiercely to the fire. "I won't let them take anything more from us." But as the night deepened and the storm raged, her determination warred with reality. The supplies Daniel had left were meager: some salted pork, a small sack of flour, dried beans, a little coffee. Perhaps enough for a week if stretched carefully. The root cellar might have some preserved vegetables, but nothing that would sustain them through a Dakota winter. By morning, the snow had drifted against the cabin door, and Emma had to force it open, the cold air rushing in like an invader. The homestead lay buried under a blanket of white, peaceful and deadly in its beauty. The storage shed was nearly invisible, only its roof distinguishable from the surrounding landscape. Emma bundled Timmy in every layer they owned before venturing out. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Timmy whimpered but didn't complain as she carried him through snow that reached her knees in places. The shed door, as Daniel had warned, was frozen shut. Emma set Timmy down momentarily, bracing herself against the rough wood as she pushed and lifted simultaneously. The door gave with a groan of protest, and Emma nearly fell forward with the sudden release. Inside, shadows concealed the contents until her eyes adjusted. Daniel had indeed left supplies, a small pile in the corner that looked pitiful against the vastness of their need. A half-empty sack of potatoes, some jars of preserved fruit, a small bag of cornmeal, and surprisingly, Robert's old rifle, which Thomas had claimed as his own the day after the funeral. Tears sprang to Emma's eyes at this small act of defiance from Daniel. The rifle meant protection and possibly food if she could hunt. She had watched Robert clean and load it countless times, but had fired it only once herself. Still, it was better than nothing. As she gathered what she could carry, a sound from outside froze her in place. Not the wind, something else. The distinctive jingling of harness and bridle. Riders. Hope flared briefly. Had the Wilsons returned, conscience-stricken, before dying just as quickly? No, Thomas and William would never return, which meant strangers were approaching the homestead. In Emma's experience, strangers in these territories, especially during winter, rarely brought good tidings. She grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded as Robert had taught her, and hurried to the shed door, peering out cautiously. Men on horseback had entered the yard, their forms dark against the snow. Not the Wilsons. These men wore heavy furs, their faces obscured by scarves against the cold. Their horses were lean, winter-tough animals that stood patiently as the riders surveyed the property. Emma ducked back inside the shed, heart pounding. Travelers sometimes stopped at isolated homesteads seeking shelter, food, or directions. But Robert had warned her about another kind of visitor, men who saw the territories as lawless opportunities, who took what they wanted from those weaker than themselves. "Mama," Timmy whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Shh, sweetheart," Emma soothed, pulling him deeper into the shadows of the shed. "We need to be very quiet now." Outside, she heard the crunch of boots on snow, voices carrying in the cold air. "Place looks abandoned," one man said. "Smoke from the chimney," another replied. "Someone's here." "Food and shelter," a third voice added. "Just what we need." Emma's grip tightened on the rifle. She had 6 bullets, 3 men, and nowhere to run. "Check the outbuildings," the second voice ordered. "I'll take the house." Footsteps approached the shed. Emma raised the rifle, placing herself in front of Timmy. She had never shot a man before, had never imagined she would need to, but for her children, she would do what was necessary. The shed door began to open. Emma steadied the rifle, finger trembling against the trigger. "Stop right there," she called, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I'm armed." The door paused, then opened fully to reveal a tall man in a fur-lined coat, his face now visible as he'd lowered his scarf. He looked to be in his 40s, with hard eyes that had seen too much and a scar that ran along one cheek. His gaze traveled from Emma's face to the rifle in her hands, then to Timmy huddled behind her skirts. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a change in calculation. "We don't mean harm, ma'am," he said, raising his empty hands slowly, just looking for shelter from the storm. "There's nothing here for you," Emma replied, the rifle remaining steady despite her fear. "Please leave." The man considered her for a long moment. "You alone out here?" Emma didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Storm's getting worse," the man continued. "Won't be able to travel far in it. We've got supplies, could share." It might have been a genuine offer, or it might be a ploy to lower her guard. Emma couldn't risk finding out. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I must insist you move on." The man's expression hardened. "Not much choice for us. Or you." His hand moved subtly toward his coat, where Emma was certain a weapon waited. Before either could act, a new sound cut through the tense silence, the thundering of multiple horses approaching fast. The man's head whipped around, his hand now openly reaching for his gun. "Carter!" one of his companions shouted urgently. "Riders coming in, a dozen at least." The man, Carter, swore under his breath. He looked back at Emma, indecision clear on his face. Whatever he saw in her expression must have convinced him she wasn't worth the trouble, because he stepped back from the doorway. "Your lucky day," he muttered, before turning and hurrying toward his horse. Emma remained frozen in place, rifle still raised, as she heard the three men mounting quickly and spurring their horses away from the homestead. Only when the sound of their departure had faded did she allow herself to lower the weapon, her arms shaking with delayed reaction. But there was no time for relief. The second group of riders was approaching, their numbers unclear, but certainly more than the three who had just fled. Emma peered cautiously around the shed door, trying to get a better look at the newcomers. What she saw stole her breath more effectively than the cold ever could. At least 10 riders were entering the yard, their horses leaving plumes of steam in the frigid air. But these were not white settlers or traders. These riders wore distinctive fur robes with painted symbols, their hair in long braids adorned with feathers and beads, their faces bearing the high cheekbones and copper skin of the Lakota Sioux. Emma pulled back into the shed, mind racing. The Lakota were known to be fierce warriors who had resisted white encroachment on their lands. Some bands had signed treaties while others continued to fight. She had no way of knowing which these might be. Those who lived in uneasy peace with settlers, or those who saw all white faces as enemies. "Mama, who are they?" Timmy whispered, peering around her skirts. "Shh, baby." Emma hushed him gently, trying to think. Running was impossible, fighting, suicidal. Hiding might work temporarily, but they would surely find them eventually. That left only one option, one that went against every instinct of self-preservation that had been drilled into her since childhood. But sometimes survival meant doing the unthinkable. With a deep breath, Emma set down the rifle and took Timmy's hand. "We're going to go meet them," she said softly. Timmy's eyes widened. "The Indians?" "But Papa said—" "I know what Papa said," Emma interrupted gently. "But sometimes we have to trust that people will be kind, even when we're afraid." It was a lesson she wasn't sure she believed herself. But what choice did they have? Squaring her shoulders, Emma walked out of the shed. Into the yard, Timmy clutched tight against her side. The Lakota riders had dismounted and were examining the homestead, some looking through windows while others checked the barn. At their appearance, all activity ceased. Every warrior turned to face them, expressions unreadable beneath the shadow of fur hoods and winter wrappings. Emma forced herself to stand tall despite the fear coursing through her. She nodded respectfully, hoping the gesture transcended language barriers. From among the warriors, one man stepped forward. Taller than the others, he moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. His face was lined with age and wisdom, eyes dark and penetrating as they assessed Emma and Timmy. He wore an elaborate headdress despite the practical winter clothing, marking him as someone of importance. A chief, Emma realized with a jolt, of both fear and hope. The man spoke, his words incomprehensible to Emma's ears. When she didn't respond, he tried again in halting, accented English. "This place? Your home?" Emma nodded. "Yes," she answered, then corrected herself. "It was. My husband." She swallowed hard. "My husband died. His family left us here." The chief's expression didn't change, but his gaze moved to her pregnant belly, then to Timmy, half hidden behind her skirts. One of the other warriors spoke rapidly in their language, gesturing angrily toward Emma. Several others nodded in agreement, their hands moving to rest on weapons. The chief held up a hand, silencing them immediately. He studied Emma for a long moment before speaking again. "Storm comes, big snow. You stay, you die." The bluntness of his assessment matched Emma's own thoughts exactly. She nodded, unable to deny the truth of his words. "I know," she whispered. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Please help us." It was the hardest thing she had ever said, to admit her helplessness, to ask for aid from strangers, from people she had been taught to fear. But pride would not keep her children alive. The chief was silent for so long that Emma began to lose hope. Then, with a decisive nod, he gestured to one of his warriors, who approached leading a horse. "You come," the chief said simply. "Storm waits for no one." Emma hesitated only briefly before understanding washed over her. They were offering escape from certain death. An unknown future, yes, but a future nonetheless. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Let me gather a few things." The chief nodded once, and Emma hurried back to the cabin, gathering only what was essential: the blankets, Robert's knife, a small packet of her medicinal herbs, and a locket containing a curl of Robert's hair. Everything that mattered could fit in a single bundle. When she returned, one of the younger warriors had already lifted Timmy onto his horse, the boy's expression a mixture of fear and fascination. Another warrior helped Emma mount behind the chief himself, her awkward, pregnant form making the task difficult. As they prepared to leave, Emma took one last look at the homestead, the place where she had known both great joy and terrible sorrow. The cabin where Timmy had been born, the field where Robert had taught her to shoot, the oak tree that now watched over his grave. "Goodbye," she whispered, letting go of the life she had known. Then the chief gave a signal, and the band moved. Out, horses pushing through the deepening snow with powerful strides. Emma held tight to the chief's fur robe, her other arm wrapped protectively around her unborn child. They rode away from Pinewood Homestead, away from abandonment and certain death, towards something unknown but alive with possibility. The storm closed in behind them, erasing their tracks as if they had never been there at all. As they rode into the heart of the blizzard, Emma realized she didn't even know the name of the man who had just saved their lives. The man whose people she had been taught to fear. The man who had shown more compassion than her husband's own blood. "What should I call you?" she asked, raising her voice above the wind. The chief half turned, his dark eyes meeting hers briefly, before facing forward again. "Maka," he replied. "It means earth." Emma nodded, committing the name to memory. Maka. The man who had offered solid ground when her world was crumbling beneath her feet. They pushed on into the whiteness, leaving behind everything familiar and venturing into a future Emma could never have imagined. But for the first time since Robert's death, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was a beginning. The world had become a canvas of white, broken only by the dark silhouettes of the Lakota riders as they pushed forward through the blizzard. Emma clung to Chief Marker's back, her fingers numb despite the thick mittens she wore. Behind them, Pinewood Homestead had long disappeared, swallowed by the storm and distance. Time lost meaning as they rode, the monotonous howl of the wind and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats in snow creating a trance-like state. Timmy had fallen asleep against the chest of the young warrior who carried him, exhaustion finally overcoming his fear and excitement. Emma watched her son's small form anxiously, relieved to see the warrior had wrapped him securely in an extra fur robe, protecting him from the worst of the cold. The snow began to ease as the day progressed. Though the temperature continued to drop, Emma could feel the change in the air, a brittle quality that made each breath painful. Her body ached from the unaccustomed horseback travel, her pregnant belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position. Yet she didn't complain. Every mile they traveled was another mile away from certain death. Chief Marker remained silent throughout the journey, focused on guiding his horse through difficult terrain. Occasionally he would raise a hand, signaling to his warriors, who would adjust their formation accordingly. Emma marveled at their ability to communicate in these conditions, at the way they seemed to read the landscape despite its featureless white expanse. As the weak winter sun began its early descent, Marker finally spoke, his deep voice startling after hours of silence. "Not far now." Emma nodded, though he couldn't see the gesture. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for what he had done. "I don't know why you helped us, but I'm grateful." Marker was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not respond. Then, without turning, he said, "Winter shows no mercy. Neither should people." The simplicity of his statement struck Emma deeply. In her world, mercy was often discussed in church on Sundays, then forgotten by Monday. The Wilsons had abandoned their own kin without hesitation. Yet these strangers, these people she had been taught to fear, had shown more compassion than her husband's blood. The terrain began to change, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills and scattered pine forests. They entered a narrow pass between two ridges, the path barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. Emma felt the tension in Marker's posture increase, his hand moving to rest near the knife at his belt. The other warriors also grew more alert, scanning the cliffs above them constantly. "Dangerous," Emma whispered, her own anxiety rising in response to theirs. Marker nodded once. "Many eyes in these hills." Emma wasn't sure if he meant animals or people, but neither possibility was comforting. She instinctively placed a protective hand over her belly, the child within moving as if sensing her distress. The pass opened suddenly into a sheltered valley, ringed by steep cliffs that blocked the worst of the wind. Emma gasped at the sight before her. The Lakota winter camp spread across the valley floor. Dozens of teepees arranged in a great circle, smoke rising from their tops to disappear into the darkening sky. Around the perimeter, pine boughs had been arranged as windbreaks, creating sheltered areas where people moved about their tasks despite the cold. As they approached, figures emerged from the teepees to watch their arrival. Women wrapped in blankets, children running alongside the horses, elders standing with dignity despite the biting cold. Emma felt their stares like physical touch, curious, wary, some openly hostile. She fought the urge to shrink against Marker's back, instead forcing herself to sit straighter to meet their eyes when she could. They reached the center of a camp where a large fire burned in a communal gathering space. Maka dismounted in one fluid motion, then turned to help Emma down. Her legs nearly buckled as they touched the ground, stiff from hours of riding. The warrior who carried Timmy approached, the boy now awake and wide-eyed as he took in his surroundings. Emma held out her arms, and Timmy practically lunged into her embrace, burying his face against her neck. "It's all right," she murmured into his hair, though she had no idea if that was true. A crowd had gathered around them, voices rising in their native tongue as they questioned the warriors. Emma caught the tone, if not the meaning. Confusion, concern, anger in some cases. She stood still, holding Timmy close, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. An older woman pushed through the crowd, her face deeply lined, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and authority. She wore an elaborately beaded dress beneath her fur wrap, bone hair pipes adorning her long braids. She spoke rapidly to Maka, gesturing toward Emma and Timmy with evident displeasure. Maka listened calmly, then responded in measured tones. Emma couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the cadence of explanation, of reasoned argument. The woman's expression remained stern, her gaze flickering to Emma repeatedly during Maka's speech. Finally, the older woman approached Emma directly. She studied her with unnerving intensity, taking in her pregnant state, her worn clothing, the protective way she held Timmy. Then she reached out a weathered hand and placed it on Emma's belly, closing her eyes briefly. Emma remained perfectly still, somehow understanding that this was an important moment, a judgment being rendered. When the woman opened her eyes again, something had shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but a softening of hostility. She spoke to Maka again, who nodded and turned to Emma. "This is Nuna, Elder Wisdom Keeper. She says you may stay until storm passes." Relief flooded through Emma, making her lightheaded. "Thank you," she said, directing the words to both Maka and Nuna. "Please tell her I'm grateful." Maka translated, and Nuna gave a small nod before turning away, already issuing instructions to others in the crowd. People began dispersing, returning to their interrupted tasks, though many continued to cast curious glances at the strange white woman and her child. Akecheta, the warrior Emma had noticed riding at Maka's right hand throughout their journey, approached and spoke urgently to the chief. His tone was respectful but insistent, his expression troubled as he looked between Maka and Emma. Maka listened, then shook his head firmly. "No," he said in English, clearly intending Emma to understand this part of the conversation. "She stays in my lodge." Akecheta's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further, giving a curt nod before walking away. Emma watched him go, understanding that she had already become a source of discord among these people who had saved her. "He does not trust me," she said softly to Maka. "He does not trust any Wasichu," Maka corrected. "White people bring death to our land." Emma couldn't argue with that assessment. She had heard the stories of battles and betrayals, of broken treaties and stolen territories. She had also seen how settlers spoke of the native peoples as obstacles to be removed, as savages to be civilized or eliminated. "I understand," she said simply. "I won't bring trouble to your people. As soon as the weather permits, Timmy and I will go." Maka's expression was unreadable. "Come," he said, ending the conversation. "You need rest, food." He led them across the camp to a large teepee situated at what Emma realized was the most prominent position in the circle. Designs were painted on the exterior, symbols she didn't recognize but could sense held meaning. And power, this was clearly the dwelling of someone important. At the entrance, Maka paused. "My lodge," he explained. "You stay here." Emma hesitated, suddenly uncomfortable. That's very kind, but wouldn't it be better if—" "No other place safe," Maka interrupted. "Some here think like Akecheta, Chief's Lodge protected." The implication was clear. Not everyone. would welcome her presence, and some might actively resent it. By placing her in his own dwelling, Maka was extending his protection in the most visible way possible. Emma nodded her understanding and ducked through the entrance that Maka held open. The interior was warm and dim, the central fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Furs and woven mats covered the ground, and various possessions hung. From the lodge poles, bundles of herbs, weapons, painted shields, and other items Emma couldn't identify. "Sit," Maka instructed, indicating a place near the fire. "Food comes soon." Emma sank down gratefully, helping Timmy settle beside her. The boy's eyes were huge as he took in their surroundings, but exhaustion had muted his usual curiosity. He leaned heavily against her side, thumb creeping toward his mouth, a habit he had mostly outgrown, but reverted to when overwhelmed. Maka busied himself around the lodge, hanging up his outer garments, adding wood to the fire, arranging sleeping robes on one side of the circular space. His movements were economical, practiced, without wasted energy. Emma watched him covertly, still trying to reconcile this man with the fearsome savage she had been taught to dread. "You have questions," Maka said suddenly, not looking up from his task. Emma, startled, then composed herself. "Many," she admitted, "but they can wait. You've done enough already by bringing us here." Maka paused, considering her. "Ask one. A thing now." Emma thought carefully. Of all the questions swirling in her mind, which was most important? Finally, she asked, "Why did you help us? You could have just ridden past the homestead." Maka sat across from her, the fire between them. In its light, she could see the lines of experience on his face, the quiet strength in his bearing. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps in his 50s, but carried himself with vigor. "3 winters ago," he began, his voice low, "blizzard worse than this one. Hunting party caught in open country, no shelter." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "My son among them." Emma's heart clenched, already anticipating where this story was leading. "They find cabin, white settler cabin. Ask for shelter until storm passes." Maka's face hardened. "White man has gun, shoots my son. Others escape, bring news." "I'm so sorry," Emma whispered, horrified. Maka's gaze returned to her. "I vowed that day, never leave anyone to Storm's mercy. Not even Wasichu." He gestured to her belly. "Not children who have no choice in their fathers." The weight of his words settled over Emma like a physical presence. This man had lost his son to someone like her, a white settler afraid of the savage at his door. Yet he had chosen to break the cycle of fear and retribution by saving her and Timmy. The lodge flap opened before Emma could respond, admitting a young woman carrying a steaming wooden bowl. She set it down carefully near Emma, her curious gaze lingering on Timmy, who was now fighting to keep his eyes open. "Food," Maka said unnecessarily. "Eat, then sleep." The stew was unfamiliar, but delicious. Rich broth with tender meat and wild roots that Emma didn't recognize. She helped Timmy eat a few bites, but he was practically asleep by the 3rd spoonful. With Maka's silent assistance, she arranged a sleeping area for him on soft furs, tucking him in as his eyes finally closed completely. "He is brave, your son," Maka observed quietly. Emma smoothed Timmy's hair back from his forehead. "He is. More than he should have to be at his age." Maka nodded in understanding. "Children adapt, stronger than we think." They fell into silence as Emma finished her meal, the warmth of the food and fire beginning to thaw her frozen extremities. The events of the day crashed over her in waves, the abandonment, the desperate hours in the shed, the strangers who had threatened them, and finally the unexpected rescue by people she had been taught to fear. "Rest now," Maka said, rising to his feet. "Tomorrow brings new challenges." Emma wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion was pulling her down into its depths. She managed to ask one final question as she settled onto the sleeping robes. "Will your people accept us being here?" Maka paused at the lodge entrance. "Some will, some won't." His eyes, dark and knowing, met hers across the fire. "But all will respect my decision." With that, he ducked outside, leaving Emma alone with her sleeping son and the quiet crackle of the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind raced with everything that had happened, with all the uncertainties that lay ahead. The baby moved within her, a reminder of her most pressing responsibility. She placed a protective hand over the swell of her belly. "We're safe for now," she whispered to her unborn child. "That's what matters." Eventually, the warmth and the rhythmic sounds of the camp outside lulled her into an uneasy sleep. Emma woke disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily, confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then memory rushed back, the abandonment, the storm, the Lakota camp. She sat up quickly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles from yesterday's long ride. Timmy still slept beside her, his face peaceful in the soft morning light that filtered through the smoke hole above. Across the lodge, she saw evidence that Maka had returned during the night. His weapons lay near a rumpled sleeping robe. But he was gone again now. Emma rose quietly, careful not to wake Timmy. Her body protested, unused to sleeping on the ground despite the comfortable furs. She straightened her rumpled clothing as best she could and tried to smooth her tangled hair with her fingers, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. The lodge flap opened and a young woman entered carrying a bundle of clothing. She paused when she saw Emma awake, then gave a small nod of greeting. "How?" she said, the Lakota greeting Emma had heard others use. "Hello," Emma responded, unsure of protocol. The woman looked to be a few years younger than Emma, perhaps 20 or so, with a kind face and eyes that held curiosity rather than the suspicion Emma had seen in others. She set down the bundle and gestured to Emma's worn dress. "New clothes," she said in halting English. "Yours." She struggled for the word, then mimed something torn or inadequate. "Thank you," Emma said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "That's very kind." The young woman smiled, seeming pleased that Emma understood. She pointed to herself. "Winona." "Emma," she replied, placing a hand on her chest, then indicating her son, "Timmy." Winona nodded, then gestured for Emma to take the clothes. Emma picked up the bundle, finding a buckskin dress, leggings and moccasins, all lined with soft rabbit fur for warmth. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with careful stitching and subtle beadwork along the yoke of the dress. "These are beautiful," Emma said, running her fingers over the supple leather. "But I couldn't possibly—" "Maka says," Winona interrupted, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Cold kills in bad clothes." Emma swallowed her protest, recognizing the truth in those words. Her settler's dress was designed for indoor life, with occasional outdoor chores, not for surviving a Dakota winter in a teepee. These clothes might mean the difference between life and death. "Thank you," she said again. "Please thank Maka. And for me." Winona nodded, then surprised Emma by reaching out to touch her pregnant belly gently. "Baby comes soon?" "About 2 months," Emma replied, placing her own hand beside Winona's. "In early March, I think." Winona smiled. Strong spirit. "In winter, baby." She patted Emma's belly once more, then stepped back. "I help you dress, then food." Emma hesitated, unaccustomed to such assistance, but recognizing it as a genuine offer of friendship. She nodded gratefully. With Winona's help, Emma changed into the Lakota clothing, marveling at how much warmer and more comfortable it was than her own dress. The buckskin moved with her body rather than restricting it, and the fur lining created a layer of warmth against her skin. The moccasins, too, were a revelation, soft yet supportive, lined with fur and perfectly sized for her feet. Good, Winona said approvingly, stepping back to admire the effect. Now you not freeze. Timmy chose that moment to wake, rubbing his eyes sleepily before noticing the stranger in the lodge. He pressed against Emma's side, suddenly shy. Hello. Timmy, Winona said, kneeling to his level. Hungry? The mention of food overcame his shyness. He nodded eagerly, and Winona laughed, a bright sound that made Emma smile despite her lingering anxiety. Come, Winona said, holding out her hand to Timmy. We find food. Timmy looked to Emma for permission, and she nodded encouragingly. It's all right, sweetheart. Winona is a friend. Outside, the camp was fully awake, people moving purposefully between lodges despite the cold. Emma blinked in the bright morning sunlight reflecting off the snow, taking in details she had missed in the twilight of their arrival. The camp was larger than she had initially thought, with perhaps 30 or 40 teepees arranged in the circular pattern she had noted yesterday. Between them, smaller structures served as storage or work areas. The central fire still burned, tended by elders, who sat nearby deep in conversation. Everywhere, Emma felt eyes turning toward them, some curious, some wary, a few openly hostile. She straightened her spine, determined not to show fear. Timmy, in contrast, seemed oblivious to the attention, his gaze darting excitedly from person to person, taking in the unfamiliar sights with a child's unbiased wonder. Winona led them to an area where several women worked around cooking fires, preparing the morning meal. An older woman ladled a thick porridge-like substance into wooden bowls, adding dried berries and what looked like crushed nuts to each serving. Winona spoke to her briefly, and the woman handed over 2 filled bowls, her gaze lingering on Emma with undisguised curiosity. Thank you, Emma said, accepting the bowl with a respectful nod. They found a place to sit near one of the smaller fires, and Emma helped Timmy manage his bowl. The porridge was hearty and warming, with a nutty flavor unlike anything she had tasted before. Timmy ate enthusiastically, seemingly untroubled by the strangeness of the food. As they ate, Emma noticed a group of children watching them from a short distance away, whispering among themselves. One boy, perhaps a year or 2 older than Timmy, seemed particularly curious, edging closer than the others dared. Winona noticed the direction of Emma's gaze and smiled. Chayton, she explained, my brother's son, curious one. Timmy had spotted the children now too, his expression torn between interest and uncertainty. He pressed closer to Emma's side, but his eyes remained fixed on the group, particularly on Chayton. It's all right if you want to say hello, Emma told him softly. Timmy hesitated, then shook his head, burying his face against her arm. Emma stroked his hair understandingly. Everything about their situation was overwhelming for a 4-year-old. It would take time for him to adjust. Winona said something to Chayton in Lakota, and the boy approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. He was small for his age, but sturdy, with bright, intelligent eyes that studied Timmy with undisguised interest. After a moment's consideration, Chayton reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden horse, similar to the one Robert had made for Timmy, but with distinctly Lakota designs painted on its flanks. He held it out, offering it to Timmy wordlessly. Timmy peeked out from behind Emma's arm, his eyes widening at the sight of the toy. Slowly, he reached out and took it, examining the carving with growing excitement. What do you say, Timmy? Emma prompted gently. Thank you, Timmy said shyly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived at the camp. Chayton grinned, revealing a missing front tooth, and pointed to a group of boys playing some kind of game with sticks and a small leather ball. The invitation was clear, even without words. Timmy looked up at Emma questioningly. She hesitated, maternal instinct warring with the knowledge that isolating him would only make their situation harder. "You can go play," she said finally. "Just stay where I can see you." Timmy's face lit up. He scrambled to his feet, still clutching the wooden horse, and gave Emma a quick hug before following Chayton toward the other children. "He will be safe," Winona assured her, seeing the worry in Emma's eyes. "Children accept easily." Emma nodded, watching as Timmy was introduced to the other boys. There was a brief moment of awkwardness. Then one of the boys handed Timmy a stick, and just like that, he was included in their game. The simplicity of childhood acceptance brought tears to Emma's eyes. "I wish adults were so quick to welcome differences," she said softly. Winona followed her gaze to where several warriors stood watching the interaction, their expressions ranging from neutrality to clear disapproval. "Some remember too much pain," Winona said with quiet wisdom. "Hard to forget when scars still fresh." Emma nodded, understanding all too well. She had heard the stories from other settlers, tales of raids and violence that painted the Lakota as bloodthirsty savages. But she had also heard whispers of broken treaties, of starvation imposed by the government, of sacred lands stolen and desecrated. There was pain on both sides, wounds that ran deep and festered with mistrust. "Maka is different," Winona continued. "He sees beyond the pain to what could be. That is why he is chief." "He saved our lives," Emma acknowledged. "I still don't understand why he would take such a risk for us." Winona was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. "Maka lost much. Wife, son. Perhaps he sees chance to heal old wounds." Before Emma could ask more about Maka's past, a commotion at the edge of camp drew their attention. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand, expressions alert and focused. Among them, Emma spotted Maka, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "What's happening?" she asked Winona, alarm rising in her chest. Winona frowned, listening to the rapid exchanges being called across the camp. "Riders coming, not our people." Fear jolted through Emma. "The men from yesterday? The ones who came to the homestead?" "Maybe," Winona said, already on her feet. "Come, better inside now." Emma immediately looked for Timmy, relieved to see that the children's game had moved closer to the center of camp. She called to him, and he came running, sensing the urgency in her voice. "What's wrong, Mama?" he asked, clinging to her hand as Winona hurried them toward Maka's lodge. "Nothing to worry about," Emma assured him, though her heart pounded with anxiety. "We just need to go inside for a while." From the lodge entrance, Emma watched as warriors mounted their horses and rode toward the valley's narrow entrance. Maka remained in the camp, issuing instructions to those who stayed behind. Women were gathering children, moving them toward the center of the circle where they could be better protected. Emma felt a presence behind her and turned to find Akacheta, Maka's second in command, watching her with undisguised suspicion. "They come for you," he said, his English better than she had expected. "White men always come." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. Emma lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I didn't ask them to follow us," she said. "I don't even know who they are." Akacheta's expression didn't soften. "Does not matter. Trouble follows Wasichu woman. Now our people may die for it." He walked away before Emma could respond, the truth of his words hanging heavily in the air. She had brought danger to these people who had saved her. If blood was shed today, it would be on her hands. Winona touched her arm gently. "Come inside," she urged. "Nothing you can do now." Emma allowed herself to be led into the lodge, Timmy clutching her hand tightly. Inside, she sank down onto the furs, gathering Timmy onto her lap and holding him close. "Are the bad men coming, Mama?" he whispered, his small body tense with fear. Emma stroked his hair soothingly. "We don't know who's coming," she said honestly, "but Chief Maka and his warriors will protect us." "Like Papa would have," Timmy said with the simple faith of a child. Emma swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. Yes, sweetheart, like Papa would have. Winona sat with them, her presence a comfort in the tense silence. Outside, they could hear the camp preparing for potential conflict. Orders being given, weapons being readied, families being secured. "I never meant to bring trouble," Emma said quietly. "Perhaps it would have been better if Maka had left us." Winona shook her head firmly. "No, Maka does what is right, not what is easy." She reached out to squeeze Emma's hand. "Great Spirit puts you in our path for reason. We must trust." Emma wished she could share Winona's faith, but guilt weighed heavily on her. These people had shown her more kindness than her own family, and now they faced danger because of it. The waiting was unbearable. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they sat in the lodge, straining to hear any news of what was happening at the valley's entrance. Timmy eventually dozed off in Emma's arms, the emotional exhaustion of the past days finally catching up to him. When the lodge flap finally opened, Emma startled, her arms tightening instinctively around Timmy. She exhaled in relief when Maka ducked inside, his expression grim but calm. "What happened?" Emma asked immediately. "Is everyone all right?" Maka nodded, moving to warm his hands by the fire. "No fighting today." Winona said something in Lakota, her tone questioning. Maka replied in the same language, his answer causing Winona to frown deeply. "What is it?" Emma asked, looking between them. "Who was out there?" Maka met her gaze steadily. "Soldiers from Fort Hastings." Emma's breath caught. The army, presence in the territory was supposed to protect settlers, but relations with the native tribes were complex and often hostile. "What did they want?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "They search for white woman." "And child," Maka confirmed. "Say you were taken against will." Emma felt a flash of anger. "That's ridiculous. You saved us." "Not what they believe," Maka said simply, "or want to believe." The implications were clear. A story of a white woman and child kidnapped by savages would justify military action against the Lakota. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. The army would use any excuse to push the native people further from their lands. "Did you tell them we're here?" Emma asked, uncertainty churning in her stomach. Maka's expression hardened slightly. "I tell them no white people in our camp. They have no right to enter our lands." Relief and worry battled within Emma. "Thank you, but they won't believe you, will they? They'll come back." "Yes," Maka agreed. "They will come. That is why you must learn our ways quickly." Emma blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." Maka exchanged a look with Winona, who nodded and rose to her feet. "I get things ready," she said, ducking out of the lodge. Maka took a seat across from Emma, his expression solemn. "Listen, and carefully. Soldiers will return, maybe tomorrow, maybe next day. When they come, they will demand to search camp." "And when they find us?" Emma asked, the fear evident in her voice. "They must not recognize you as white woman," Maka said simply. "You must become Lakota." Emma stared at him in shock. "That's impossible. I don't speak the language. I don't know your ways. And look at me, my skin, my hair." "Winona, we'll teach what you need to know," Maka continued, unmoved by her protests. "Hair can be darkened, skin can be stained with walnut juice, clothes you already wear. You want me to disguise myself?" Emma asked incredulously. "To protect yourself," Maka corrected. "To protect my people." Emma fell silent, turning the idea over in her mind. It seemed absurd, impossible. And yet, what choice did she have? If the soldiers found her, they would force her to leave with them, back to Fort Hastings or to Rivercross, where she had no home, no means of support. "What about Timmy?" she asked, glancing down at her sleeping son. "His hair is fair. He's obviously—" "Children easier to disguise," Maka assured her. "Many mixed-blood children in tribes." Soldiers expect to see white woman with yellow hair, not Lakota mother with dark-haired son. Emma wasn't convinced, but she recognized the logic of his plan. The soldiers would be looking for obvious outsiders, not a woman who appeared to belong to the tribe. And if they do recognize us, she pressed, what then? Maka's expression grew more serious. Then I cannot protect you. They will take you, and they will use this as reason to attack my people. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Emma, you must decide. Are you Wasichu woman who needs rescue? Or are you mother who will do anything to protect her children? Put that way, there was no decision to make. Emma straightened her shoulders, resolve hardening within her. Tell me what I need to do. Maka nodded, satisfied with her answer. Winona will show you. You learn quickly, yes? When I have to, Emma replied. Good. Maka rose to his feet. Because time is short and there is much to learn. As if on cue, Winona returned carrying several bundles, one of plant materials, another of beads and bone tools, and a third containing what looked like cosmetic materials. We begin now, she announced, setting down her burdens. Emma gently transferred the sleeping Timmy to a pile of furs, then turned to face whatever transformation awaited her. She had never imagined that her survival would depend on becoming someone else entirely, on shedding the identity she had known all her life. The prospect was terrifying, but also strangely liberating. In the Wilson household, she had been property, a vessel for children, a worker whose value decreased with pregnancy. To the soldiers, she would be a victim to rescue or a traitor to condemn. But here in this Lakota camp, she had the chance to define herself anew, not as Emma Wilson, abandoned settler wife, but as something she had yet to discover. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Hold still, Winona instructed, applying the dark walnut mixture to the last section of Emma's hair. The smell was pungent, but not unpleasant, earthy and organic. Emma had been sitting cross-legged for over an hour as Winona worked meticulously, transforming her light brown hair to a deep, rich black. Is this really going to work? Emma asked, doubt creeping into her voice despite her determination. Winona's hands were gentle but firm as they worked through Emma's hair. Has worked many generations. Our grandmothers used for ceremonial painting, for hiding tracks, for many things. Emma tried to imagine how she would look, how different her reflection would be. It had been days since she'd seen a mirror, not since the small cracked one that hung in the cabin at Pinewood Homestead. In some ways, it was fitting. She barely recognized herself on the inside anymore. Why should her outside remain unchanged? There, Winona said, finally satisfied. Now must dry before we do skin. Emma touched her hair cautiously. It felt coated, but not unpleasantly so, still flexible rather than stiff. Across the lodge, Timmy sat with Chayton, the two boys engaged, in a game involving pebbles and a circle drawn in the dirt. Timmy's fair hair had already been treated, the walnut dye transforming his golden locks to a deep brown. With his natural olive complexion, a trait inherited from Robert, the change made him look remarkably like a Lakota child. He learns quickly, Winona observed, following Emma's gaze. Already knows some words. It was true. In the 3 days since their arrival, Timmy had picked up several Lakota words and phrases, eagerly repeating them back to Chayton, who would clap his hands in delight at his student's progress. The language barrier seemed almost non-existent between the two boys, who communicated through a mixture of words, gestures, and the universal language of play. Children adapt, Emma said, echoing Maka's words from that first night. It's easier, for them. They don't carry the weight of all that came before. Winona nodded thoughtfully. This is why elders say we must learn from children. They see with clear eyes. A young girl entered the lodge carrying a steaming pot of herbal tea, She set it down carefully near Emma and Winona, her curious eyes lingering on Emma's transformed hair before she ducked back outside. Winona poured the tea into 2 wooden cups, offering one to Emma. "Drink, good for baby." Emma accepted gratefully, inhaling the fragrant steam. The Lakota's knowledge of medicinal herbs had impressed her from the start. This particular tea, made from a mixture of raspberry leaves, nettle, and other plants Emma didn't recognize, had eased the discomfort of her advancing pregnancy remarkably. "Thank you," she said, taking a careful sip of the hot liquid, "for everything you're teaching me. I know not everyone approves." It was an understatement. Though Winona and a handful of others had been welcoming, many in the camp still regarded Emma with suspicion or outright hostility. Dakota remained the most vocal in his opposition to her presence, arguing repeatedly with Maka in discussions Emma could not understand, but whose tone was unmistakable. "Some wounds take long to heal," Winona said diplomatically, "but Maka's word is law. None will harm you under his protection." Emma wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded anyway. "Tell me more about Maka," she said, changing the subject. "He's been kind to us, but he remains a mystery." Winona considered the request, her dark eyes thoughtful. "What do you wish to know?" "Everything," Emma admitted. "How he became chief, what happened to his family, why he seems different from the others." Winona took a sip of her tea before responding. "Maka comes from long line of chiefs. His father was great warrior, respected by all bands of Lakota, but Maka did not want to follow war path. He was, how you say, seeker of peace, even as young man. That couldn't have been easy," Emma observed, "among his own people or with the settlers." "No," Winona agreed. "Many thought him weak, until battle at Split Rock Valley. Her expression grew somber. White soldiers attacked village without warning, many killed, including women, children. Maka led counterattack, saved many lives. After, he could have called for revenge raids against all white settlements. Instead, he sought treaty talks." Emma found herself holding her breath, captivated by the story. "What happened?" "Treaty made, broken by whites within 1 moon," Winona said matter-of-factly, without bitterness. As always happens, but Maka's approach had changed. He understood then that true strength comes from wisdom, not just war skill. People began to listen, to follow. "And his family?" Emma asked hesitantly, remembering what Maka had told her about his son's death. Pain flickered across Winona's face. His wife, Wachiwi, died of white man's disease 6 winters ago, coughing sickness that came after soldiers visited nearby trading post. "Tuberculosis," Emma murmured, familiar with the devastating impact the disease had on native communities. Winona nodded. "After, only son Chatan remained. He was light of Maka's life. When he was killed." She paused, struggling to find words adequate to describe such loss. Maka changed again. Some thought grief would turn him hard, make him hate all white people. Instead, he became more determined to find path between old ways and new world. "Not everyone agrees with that path," Emma said, thinking of Dakota and his supporters. "No," Winona confirmed. "Some say he betrays our people by seeking ways to live with whites. Others say he sees truth others cannot, that old ways alone cannot save us in changing world." Emma considered this, marveling at the complexity of Lakota politics and perspectives. The newspapers and government agents presented them as a monolithic entity, the Sioux problem, without acknowledging the diverse viewpoints and internal debates that existed within the tribe, just as they did in any community. "And what do you believe?" Emma asked. Winona smiled slightly. "I believe Great Spirit puts us in each other's paths for reason, like you and Maka." She rose to her feet, gathering the materials for the next stage of Emma's transformation. Now, we begin with skin. Face first, then hands. For the next hour, Winona worked methodically, applying a mixture of walnut juice, berries, and other ingredients to Emma's exposed skin. The concoction was cool and slightly tingling, staining her fair complexion to a richer golden brown tone. Emma sat patiently through the process, marveling at Winona's skill and focus. "How long will this last?" she asked, as Winona finished with her hands. "Many days," Winona replied. "We refresh if needed, but be careful not to wash too hard." When the application was complete, Winona brought out a polished piece of metal that served as a mirror. Emma gasped softly at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was recognizable as herself, yet fundamentally changed. With her darkened hair and skin, she could easily pass for a mixed heritage woman, perhaps the offspring of a Lakota, mother and white father, a not uncommon occurrence in the territories. "Now for final touch," Winona said, bringing forward the bundle of beads and bone tools. "We pierce ears, Lakota style." Emma touched her earlobes nervously. "Is that necessary?" Winona nodded firmly. "All Lakota women wear earrings. Soldiers. Look for such details." Steeling herself, Emma nodded her agreement. The process was quick but painful. A sharp bone needle pushed through each earlobe, followed by the insertion of simple bone hoops. Winona worked efficiently, applying a numbing paste before and a healing salve after, but Emma still had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "Pain brings beauty," Winona said with a sympathetic smile as she finished. "Now truly look like one of us." Emma studied her reflection again, amazed at the transformation. The earrings completed the illusion convincingly. She appeared fully integrated into Lakota culture, at least visually. "Mama!" Timmy's voice broke through her thoughts. He had finally noticed her transformation and came running over, his eyes wide with wonder. "You look different," Emma smiled, pulling him onto her lap. "Do you like it?" Timmy reached up to touch her darkened hair curiously. "You look like Winona now," he declared. Then, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "Are we playing a game of pretend?" Emma exchanged a glance with Winona, unsure how to explain the situation to a 4-year-old. Before she could formulate a response, the lodge flap opened and Maka entered, accompanied by Akacheta. Both men stopped short at the sight of Emma's transformation. Akacheta's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in Maka's eyes, approval mixed with something deeper that Emma couldn't quite identify. "Good," Maka said after a moment. "Very good. The disguise will not fool soldiers for long," Akacheta said in Lakota, which Emma had begun to understand in small fragments. "If they question her, then we must teach her to speak and move as one of us," Maka replied firmly, switching to English for Emma's benefit, starting now. For the remainder of the day, Emma underwent an intensive immersion in Lakota culture. Maka and Winona took turns teaching her basic phrases, proper postures and gestural customs. They drilled her on the camp's structure. Who was related to whom, which lodges belonged to which families, information a true tribe member would know instinctively. "If soldier asks your name," Maka instructed, "you are Hantewi," meaning faithful. "You are widow of Lakota hunter killed by white men 2 winters ago." Emma repeated the name, practicing the pronunciation until Maka nodded his satisfaction. "And Timmy?" "He is Hanska, tall one," Maka replied. "Young enough that he need not speak much. Children often shy with strangers." Emma practiced walking as Winona demonstrated, a distinctive gait that was both proud and graceful, different from the hurried steps of settler women. She learned how to carry water vessels, how to sit properly in the lodge, how to greet elders with appropriate respect. By evening, her head was spinning with new information, her body aching from the unaccustomed movements. Timmy had long since returned to his game with Chayton, the two boys now inseparable despite their brief acquaintance. As darkness fell, more of the tribe gathered in the central area, drawn by the growing firelight and the scent of cooking food. Unlike previous nights when Emma had eaten in the relative seclusion of Maka's lodge, tonight he indicated she should join the communal meal. "Time to be seen," he explained. "People must grow used to your presence." Emma's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she nodded her understanding. This was a test of her new appearance, of her ability to blend in, of the tribe's willingness to accept the deception. She took Timmy's hand and followed Maka to the fire, conscious of the eyes that turned toward them as they approached. Nuna, the elder wisdom keeper, sat in a place of honor near the fire. She beckoned Emma forward with a gnarled hand, inspecting Winona's handiwork with critical eyes. After a long, tense moment, she nodded once and patted the space beside her. An invitation to sit. Relief washed through Emma as she took the offered place. Nuna's approval carried weight. If she accepted the transformation, others would follow her lead. Timmy settled against Emma's side, his eyes wide as he took in the gathering crowd. The meal was served in a ceremonial fashion, with elders receiving their portions first, followed by warriors, then women and children. Emma watched carefully, mimicking Winona's movements as she accepted her bowl of stew and the flat bread that accompanied it. She kept her eyes appropriately lowered, her posture humble yet dignified as she had been instructed. Conversation flowed around her in Lakota, too rapid for her to follow completely. She caught words here and there. Soldiers, fort, council. Enough to understand that the tribe was discussing the impending return of the military patrol. Tension underscored the conversation, particularly among the warriors who sat together on the far side of the fire. Akecheta spoke at length, his tone forceful, his gestures emphatic. Though Emma couldn't understand every word, his meaning was clear enough. He opposed the risk they were taking by harboring her, disguised or not. When he finished, silence fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to Maka, waiting for the chief's response. Maka rose slowly to his feet, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. He spoke calmly, his deep voice carrying easily through the night air. "Akecheta speaks with courage and concern for our people," he began in Lakota, then switched to English. A deliberate choice that Emma understood was meant to include her in this crucial discussion. "He fears the soldiers will bring harm to our camp because of the white woman and child we shelter." Maka's gaze swept the circle, meeting the eyes of his people one by one. "His fear is not without reason. White soldiers have brought death to Lakota before and will again." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emma's heart sank, wondering if Maka was about to rescind his protection, to send her away for the good of his tribe. "But I ask you this," Maka continued. "What are we if we abandon our sacred principles when they become difficult to uphold? What are we if we turn away those in need because we fear risk?" He gestured toward Emma and Timmy. This woman and child were left to die by their own people in the harshest moon of winter. Would we do the same? Are we no better than those who abandoned them? The crowd fell silent, considering his words. Emma felt the weight of dozens of gazes upon her, assessing, judging, deciding her fate. "The soldiers will come," Maka acknowledged. "They may suspect, they may question, but they will find only a Lakota widow and her son, accepted by our tribe as is our way with those who have nowhere else to go." He turned to Akecheta. "I have heard your concerns, my friend. They are wise and worthy. But in this, I must follow the path the Great Spirit has shown me." Akecheta's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod of acceptance. The chief had spoken, and while disagreement was permitted, defiance was not. The tension in the gathering eased, conversation gradually resuming as people returned to their meal. Emma released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, overwhelmed by Mahka's defense of her presence. Beside her, Nuna spoke, her English halting but clear. "Chief risks much for you. Do not waste his sacrifice." Emma met the elders, sharp gaze. "I won't," she promised. "I'll learn everything I can to protect your people from harm because of me." Nuna studied her for a long moment, then reached out to touch Emma's rounded belly. "Two spirits you carry," she said cryptically. "One old, one new, both important to our future." Before Emma could ask what she meant, Nuna had turned away, engaging one of the other elders in conversation. Emma was left pondering the strange pronouncement, absently rubbing her belly as the baby within kicked vigorously, as if responding to Nuna's words. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of sensory impressions. The smoky scent of the fire, the haunting melodies of songs Emma didn't understand, the vibrant colors of ceremonial clothing worn by some of the tribal members. Timmy eventually dozed off against her side, lulled by the warmth and the rhythmic drumming that accompanied the songs. As the gathering began to disperse, Mahka approached and knelt beside Emma. "You did well," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we continue training. Soldiers will come with next sun, perhaps day after." Emma nodded, anxiety fluttering in her chest at the reminder of the imminent threat. "Thank you for what you said tonight, for defending us." Mahka's expression remained impassive, but his eyes softened slightly. "I spoke only truth. We cannot abandon our principles when they become inconvenient." He glanced at the sleeping Timmy, then back to Emma. "Rest now. Dawn comes early, and there is much still to learn." With Winona's help, Emma carried Timmy back to Mahka's lodge. The boy barely stirred as they settled him onto his sleeping furs, his small face peaceful in the dim firelight. "He looks Lakota now," Winona observed, tucking a blanket around Timmy's shoulders. "Belongs here." Emma watched her son, marveling at how quickly he had adapted to their new circumstances. In just a few days, he had found a friend, begun learning a new language, and embraced experiences that would have been unimaginable at Pinewood Homestead. Children truly were remarkable in their resilience. "Will they truly come tomorrow?" Emma asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted within her. Winona nodded solemnly. "Scouts saw them setting camp near River Bend. Half-day ride from here. Will reach us by midday tomorrow, if weather holds." Fear and determination warred within Emma. She was far from ready, her language skills rudimentary, her knowledge of customs incomplete. But time had run out. Tomorrow would test not only her disguise, but her courage. "I should practice more," she said, reaching for the small bundle of items Winona had been using to test her knowledge of Lakota. Words. Winona gently but firmly removed the bundle from her hands. "No, now you need rest. Baby needs strength. Learning with tired mind is like trying to see through muddy water." Recognizing the wisdom in Winona's advice, Emma nodded reluctantly and prepared for sleep, but rest proved elusive despite her exhaustion. She lay awake long into the night, rehearsing Lakota phrases in her mind, imagining confrontations with suspicious soldiers and worrying about what would happen if her disguise failed. What would they do to her if they discovered her deception? More importantly, what would they do to the Lakota who had sheltered her? The questions chased each other through her mind, preventing sleep until sheer exhaustion finally pulled her under. She woke to the sound of activity in the camp, voices calling, horses nickering, the rhythmic pounding of something being prepared. For a disoriented moment, she thought the soldiers had already arrived. Then Winona ducked into the lodge, her expression calm but purposeful. "Good you awake," she said. "Much to do before they come." Emma sat up quickly, wincing as her pregnant body protested the sudden movement. "They're coming today? You're certain?" Winona nodded. "Scouts report they broke camp at first light. Moving this way." She set down a bundle of clothing. Not the everyday buckskins Emma had been wearing, but more elaborate garments with decorative beadwork and fringe. Special clothes make you look more important. Soldiers less likely to question wife of respected hunter. Emma rose and dressed quickly with Winona's assistance. The ceremonial dress felt heavier than her usual attire, the beadwork along the yoke creating a pleasant weight across her shoulders. Winona added a beaded necklace, carefully arranged Emma's now dark hair in a traditional style, and refreshed the walnut stain on her face and hands where it had faded slightly overnight. Remember, Winona instructed as she worked, keep eyes down when warriors speak. Answer questions simply. If you don't understand, say, "No speak English good," and look to Mahka. Emma nodded, committing the instructions to memory. And Timmy? Chayton's mother will keep both boys busy, away from soldiers if possible, Winona assured her. He knows to answer only to Hanska today, yes? Yes, Emma confirmed. We practiced last night before bed. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting her. Winona, what will happen if they realize who we are? Winona's hands stilled momentarily. Better not to think of this, she said finally. But if it happens, Maka has plan. She wouldn't elaborate further, and Emma didn't press. Some things were perhaps better not known in advance. Outside, the camp had been transformed. Gone were the scattered tools of daily life, the drying racks of meat, the partially completed crafts. Everything had been tidied, organized, and arranged to present a specific image to the coming visitors. One of orderly tribal life, neither too primitive to offend white sensibilities, nor too advanced to threaten them. Maka stood at the center of the camp, issuing final instructions to his people. He wore full ceremonial regalia, an impressive headdress, a breastplate of bone and beads, and a painted shield slung across his back. It was a deliberate display of authority, Emma realized, designed to command respect from the soldiers. He spotted Emma and beckoned her over. "Remember who you are today," he said without preamble. "Ante we, widow of respected hunter. You live in my lodge because you have no family left, you understand?" "Yes," Emma replied, straightening her posture as she had been taught. "I understand." Maka studied her appearance critically, then gave a satisfied nod. "Good. Stay near Winona, speak little. If soldiers separate you from others, remember what we taught about emergency signals." Emma touched the small bone whistle concealed in a pouch at her waist. 3 short blasts would bring help immediately. It was a precaution she hoped desperately not to need. Akecheta approached, his face painted with red and black designs that emphasized his already intimidating features. He spoke rapidly to Maka in Lakota, gesturing toward the valley entrance. "They come," Maka translated grimly. 6 soldiers, 1 officer. Scouts say they carry paper, written order perhaps. Emma's heart began to race, but she forced her breathing to remain steady, her expression calm. Panicking now would only draw attention to herself later. "I'm ready," she said with more confidence than she felt. As the camp prepared for the soldiers' arrival, Emma sought out Timmy, finding him with Chayton and several other children under the watchful eye of Chayton's mother, Kimimela. The woman's expression was stern but not unkind as she oversaw the children's game. Something involving small carved pieces moved across a hide marked with designs. "Timmy," Emma said, kneeling awkwardly beside him. "Remember what we talked about? Today your name is Hanska." Timmy nodded solemnly. "And I stay with Chayton and don't talk to the soldiers because I'm shy." "That's right," Emma said, relieved at his clear understanding. "It's like a game of pretend, but a very important one." "I know, Mama," Timmy said with the earnestness only a child could muster. "It's to keep us safe." Emma hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent, now mingled with the earthy odors of the camp. "That's right, sweetheart. To keep everyone safe. A horn sounded from the eastern edge of the camp, the signal that the soldiers had been spotted approaching the valley's entrance. Emma reluctantly released Timmy, placing a kiss on his forehead before standing. "Be good for Kimimela," she instructed. "I'll see you soon." As she made her way back to where Winona waited, Emma caught sight of Nuna watching her from the entrance of her lodge. The elder woman made a subtle gesture, touching her heart, then extending her hand toward Emma, a blessing perhaps, or a wish for protection. Emma returned the gesture awkwardly, grateful for even this small show of support. Winona guided Emma to a position near one of the cooking fires, handing her a mortar and pestle filled with dried herbs. "Work these," she instructed. "Look busy, but not too busy to notice soldiers." Emma began grinding the herbs, the repetitive motion oddly calming to her frayed nerves. Around her, the camp continued its activities with a forced normality that would have been comical under other circumstances. Women weaving or cooking, men working on weapons or pipes, all careful not to appear too interested in the approaching visitors. The soldiers rode into view minutes later, a small but official-looking party led by a young lieutenant whose uniform was immaculate despite the dusty trail. The warriors met them at the edge of the camp, a deliberate show of control. The whites would not simply ride in unescorted. Maka stepped forward, his bearing regal and commanding. "Welcome to our camp," he said in careful English. "What brings army to Lakota land?" The lieutenant dismounted, his movements stiff with either nervousness or arrogance, perhaps both. He was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes that scanned the camp with poorly concealed disdain. "Chief Maka," he acknowledged with minimal courtesy. "I am Lieutenant James Foster from Fort Hastings. We're conducting a search for missing settlers. A woman and child reported to have been seen in this area before the recent blizzard." Maka's expression revealed nothing. "Many settlers pass through our lands. We do not interfere if they do not threaten our people." Foster pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "We have reason to believe the woman and child may have been brought to a Lakota camp against their will. I have orders to search all encampments in the region." A murmur ran through the gathered Lakota. Being accused of kidnapping was a serious matter, one that had led to punitive military actions against tribes in the past. Emma kept her head slightly bowed, focusing on the herbs in her mortar, but her every sense was attuned to the confrontation. "Your orders have no power here," Maka said, his voice hardening. "This is Lakota land by treaty. You may ask questions, but you have no right to search our lodges." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "Chief, I don't want trouble, but I have my orders. The woman's description matches reports we've received. Mid-20s, light brown hair, pregnant, traveling with a young boy around 4 years old. If you're harboring them, it would be better for everyone if you simply turned them over now." From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Akacheta step forward, his hand moving subtly toward his knife. Maka gestured for him to stand down, maintaining his composed demeanor. "No white woman or child in our camp," Maka stated firmly. "But you may ask your questions and observe our people from here if it will satisfy your orders." It was a calculated compromise. Not a full refusal that might provoke the soldiers, but not a complete acquiescence either. Foster considered the offer, his gaze sweeping the camp again before returning to Maka. "Very well," he said finally. "My men will remain here, but I would like to walk through your camp and speak with your people." Maka nodded once. "I will accompany you. One man only." The lieutenant hesitated, then agreed, issuing orders for his men to stay mounted at the edge of the camp. The soldiers looked relieved. None of them seemed eager to venture further into Lakota territory. As Maka began to lead Foster through the camp, Emma bent her head lower over her task, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. The herbs in the mortar had long since been ground to a fine powder, but she continued the motion mechanically, praying the lieutenant would pass by without noticing her. Fate was not so kind. Maka and Foster paused near the cooking area, the lieutenant's gaze sweeping over the women at work. His eyes lingered on Emma for a moment, and she felt a chill run down her spine despite the fire's warmth. "You there," Foster called in English. "Look up, please." Emma's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm as she slowly raised her head, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered, as Winona had taught her. The lieutenant studied her face, his expression skeptical. "What's your name?" he asked. Emma took a careful breath before answering in the broken English Winona had helped her practice. "Hante-wee," she said, deliberately thickening her accent. "No speak good English." Foster frowned, taking a step closer. "You look different from the others." Maka intervened smoothly. Hante-wee mother was Dakota. Father was French trapper. Many mixed blood in tribes now. The lieutenant continued to study Emma, his gaze uncomfortably intense. "And the boy I saw earlier, the one playing with the other children, is he yours?" Emma nodded, placing a protective hand on her pregnant belly. "My son, Hanska." "May I speak with him?" Foster asked, his tone making it clear this was not truly a request. Panic flared within Emma. Timmy's disguise was convincing, but he was only 4. One wrong word, one slip of his carefully practiced story, and everything would unravel. Before she could respond, Winona stepped forward. "Boy very shy," she explained. "Father killed by white hunters 2 winters ago, now fears all white men." Foster's expression hardened with suspicion. "I insist on speaking with him." Maka's face remained impassive, but Emma saw the tension in his shoulders, the subtle shift in his stance that prepared him for potential conflict. "Boy is playing with other children," he said evenly. "We will bring him, but do not expect him to speak much." With a subtle gesture, Maka signaled to one of the younger warriors, who moved off toward where the children were gathered. Emma's heart raced as she waited, every second stretching into an eternity of fear and anticipation. Please, she prayed silently to whatever God might be listening. Please let him remember what we practiced. Please keep him safe. The future of her child, of both her children, hung in the balance of the next few moments, as did the safety of the people who had risked everything to shelter them from the deadly Dakota winter. The young warrior returned with Timmy and Chayton, both boys looking solemn and wide-eyed at being summoned before the strange white men. Emma fought to keep her expression neutral despite the fear clawing at her chest. Timmy was staring at the ground, his small shoulders hunched, whether from genuine shyness or remembered instructions, Emma couldn't tell. "This is Hanska," Maka said, gesturing to Timmy, "son of Hante-wee." Lieutenant Foster knelt to Timmy's level, his voice softening slightly as he addressed the boy. "Hello there, son. No need to be afraid. I just want to ask you a few questions." Timmy pressed closer to Chayton, refusing to meet the lieutenant's eyes. Emma silently thanked whoever had thought to position Chayton alongside him. The other boy's presence seemed to steady Timmy, reminding him of his role. "What's your name?" Foster asked gently. Timmy remained silent, staring fixedly at the ground. Chayton placed a protective hand on his friend's shoulder, glaring at the lieutenant with undisguised hostility. Foster looked up at Maka. "Does he speak English at all?" "Little," Maka replied. "Mother teaches some words, but he is shy with strangers especially." He let the implication hang in the air, especially white men like those who killed his father. The lieutenant frowned, studying Timmy intently. Emma held her breath, noting how her son's darkened hair and skin made him look remarkably like the Lakota children around him. His features, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his nose, could easily belong to a child of mixed heritage. But would it be enough to fool a suspicious military man? "Son," Foster tried again, "can you tell me how long you've lived here with the Lakota?" Timmy looked up briefly, then back down, mumbling something inaudible. "Speak up, please," Foster urged, leaning closer. Timmy shrank back, then said in a small voice, "Always." Emma's heart skipped a beat. It was the answer they had practiced, but hearing him deliver it to a real soldier, rather than in the safety of Mahka's lodge, made the danger suddenly, painfully real. Foster's gaze sharpened. "Always? You were born here?" Timmy nodded without looking up. "And your mother," Foster continued, glancing briefly at Emma. "She's always been here too?" At this, Timmy hesitated, clearly trying to remember the story they had rehearsed. Chayton squeezed his shoulder, a silent reminder, and Timmy nodded again. The lieutenant rose to his feet, his expression troubled. He turned to Mahka. "Chief, are there any other women in your camp who might match the description I gave you? The missing settler woman would be visibly pregnant, traveling with a boy about this age." "No others," Mahka answered firmly. "All our people accounted for." Foster paced a few steps, clearly dissatisfied. He turned suddenly to Emma. "Where were you during the recent blizzard?" he asked, the question sharp, designed to catch her off guard. Emma's mind raced. She hadn't prepared for this specific question. She glanced briefly at Winona, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Here," Emma answered, keeping her accent thick. "In camp, big storm, no travel." "The whole time?" Foster pressed. "Your hunters didn't go out at all during the storm?" "Some go," Emma conceded, remembering what Mahka had told her about the rescue party. "Bring back." She pretended to search for the English word. "Supplies before snow too deep." Foster turned back to Mahka. "Your hunting party went out during the blizzard?" "Small party," Mahka confirmed. "Check traps, hunt before storm worst, return same day." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "And they didn't encounter any settlers, no one in distress?" "No settlers," Mahka stated firmly. "No one but our own people." Foster fell silent, his gaze moving between Emma, Timmy, and Mahka. The tension in the air was palpable, the entire camp holding its collective breath. Emma could feel droplets of sweat forming beneath her ceremonial dress, despite the winter chill. "Lieutenant," one of the soldiers called from the edge of the camp. "Begging your pardon, sir, but we should move out soon if we're to check the next camp before nightfall." Foster hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave, without resolving his suspicions. His hand moved to the inside pocket of his uniform jacket, withdrawing a small item that Emma couldn't immediately identify. "One last thing," he said, approaching Emma again. "Do you recognize this?" He held out a small silver locket on a broken chain. With a jolt of horror, Emma recognized it instantly. Her own locket, the one containing a lock of Robert's hair, which she had brought from the homestead. She must have lost it during their journey to the Lakota camp, the chain snapping without her notice. It took every ounce of willpower to keep her face impassive, to not reach for the precious memento that represented her last tangible connection. To Robert. She forced her eyes to remain blank, uncomprehending, as she shook her head slowly. "No," she said, the word barely audible. "Not mine." Foster studied her reaction intently, clearly looking for any sign of recognition. "Are you certain? We found it in the snow near an abandoned homestead. It contains a lock of hair." Emma met his gaze with feigned confusion. "No, understand. Not mine." For a long, terrible moment, Foster continued to stare at her, suspicion written plainly across his features. Then, with obvious reluctance, he tucked the locket back into his pocket. "Very well," he said, turning to Mahka. "Thank you for your cooperation, Chief. I'll report to my commanding officer that we found no sign of the missing settlers here." The words should have brought relief, but Foster's tone made it clear he remained unconvinced. As Marka escorted him back to his waiting men, Emma fought to keep her legs from buckling beneath her. Winona moved closer, a steadying presence at her side. "Breathe," Winona murmured, "not finished yet." Indeed, the soldiers hadn't departed. The lieutenant was engaged in intense conversation with Marka at the edge of camp, occasionally glancing back toward Emma and Timmy. The other soldiers remained mounted, alert and watchful, their hands never straying far from their weapons. Emma knelt beside Timmy, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "You did so well," she whispered against his hair, too softly for anyone else to hear. "So brave." Timmy clung to her, his small body trembling slightly. "Did I do it right, Mama?" he whispered back. "Perfect," she assured him. "Now go with Chayton and keep playing. Remember to stay with the other children." Kimmy Mella appeared, ushering both boys back toward the children's play area with quiet efficiency. As they moved away, Emma fought the urge to call Timmy back, to keep him close where she could protect him. But that would only draw more attention. Winona guided Emma back to the cooking fire. "Keep working," she instructed. "Act normal until they go." Emma resumed grinding the already pulverized herbs, her hands shaking slightly despite her best efforts to appear calm. At the edge of camp, the discussion between Marka and Foster seemed to grow more heated, the lieutenant gesturing emphatically while Marka maintained his stoic demeanor. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Foster mounted his horse, casting one last suspicious glance toward Emma before giving the order for his men to move out. The soldiers wheeled their mounts around and rode toward the valley entrance, their rigid posture betraying their discomfort at having their backs to the Lakota camp. No one moved or spoke until the last soldier had disappeared from view. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the camp erupted into activity, warriors immediately dispatching scouts to ensure the soldiers truly left, women gathering children, elders emerging from lodges where they had waited out the confrontation. Marka strode back into the center of the camp, his expression grim. "They go, but they are not convinced," he announced to the gathered tribe. "Lieutenant says they will return tomorrow with more men to conduct thorough search." A ripple of alarm passed through the crowd. Emma felt the weight of accusatory stares, the unspoken blame for bringing this danger to their doorstep. "What do we do?" Akacheta demanded, voicing what many were clearly thinking. "We cannot fight the army. Not here. Not with women and children." Marka's face was unreadable as he surveyed his people. "We will not fight," he declared. "We will move." Shocked murmurs ran through the gathering. Moving camp in the middle of winter was no small undertaking, especially with minimal notice. "To where?" someone called. "The hunting grounds are days away." "Not hunting grounds," Marka replied. "Sacred caves in Black Hill Ridge. One day's journey if we travel through night." More murmurs, these of mixed concern and approval. Emma understood enough to realize the caves Marka mentioned were significant to the Lakota, perhaps a place they would normally avoid disturbing except in dire necessity. "Winter camp in sacred caves?" Akacheta questioned, his tone skeptical. "Elders say spirits there must not be disturbed." "I have consulted with Nuna," Marka answered, gesturing to the elder wisdom keeper who nodded solemnly. "She says spirits will understand our need. Better to seek their protection than face white man's bullets." This seemed to settle the matter. Despite the enormous effort it would require, moving camp was clearly preferable to a confrontation with armed soldiers. The tribe dispersed to begin preparations immediately, an air of urgent purpose replacing the tension of the soldiers' visit. Emma stood frozen, uncertain of her role in this sudden upheaval. Winona touched her arm gently. "Come," she said. "Much to do. We pack Marka's lodge first." Grateful for the direction, Emma followed Winona. Inside the lodge, they worked quickly, dismantling the interior furnishings and packing them onto travois. A-framed structures that could be dragged behind horses. "I've brought all this trouble to your people," Emma said as they worked. "I'm so sorry." Winona paused, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "Would have come anyway," she said simply. "Army always finds reason to push Lakota. Today you, tomorrow something else." The matter-of-fact acceptance in Winona's voice struck Emma deeply. This constant displacement, this perpetual adaptation to external threats, was simply a way of life for the Lakota. A reality Emma had never had to consider from her position of settler privilege, even during her own hardships. By mid-afternoon, the camp was a hive of coordinated activity. TPs were dismantled, their components loaded onto horses and travois. Essential supplies were packed, non-essentials abandoned or cached for potential retrieval later. Children were assigned tasks appropriate to their ages, everyone contributing to the massive effort. Timmy worked alongside Chayton, the two boys gathering small items and bringing them to the women who packed the larger bundles. Emma marveled at how, naturally, her son had integrated into the tribe's collective workflow, how readily he accepted instruction from any adult who gave it. As twilight approached, Maka gathered everyone for final instructions. The camp was now reduced to bare ground, with packed travois and saddled horses ready for immediate departure. "We travel through night," he announced. "No fires, no talking. Above whisper. Children and pregnant women ride, others walk and lead horses. Scouts go ahead and behind." He paused, surveying the assembled tribe with evident pride in their efficiency. "Soldiers expect to find us here tomorrow. By then we will be safe in sacred caves. They will find only cold ashes." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Despite the hardship of the sudden move, there was a palpable sense of satisfaction at outmaneuvering the army. "Hantewi," Maka continued, using Emma's Lakota name deliberately. "You ride with me, boy with Winona, stay in center of group." Emma nodded her understanding. The arrangement was strategic, placing her and Timmy in the most protected positions, surrounded by tribal members should they encounter any trouble on the journey. As final preparations were completed, Akacheta approached Emma unexpectedly. His expression was no longer openly hostile, though neither was it particularly warm. "You bring army to our people," he said bluntly, "but you also show courage today. Not many Wasichu women would risk so much to protect Lakota." Emma wasn't sure how to respond to this backhanded acknowledgement. "I'm protecting my children," she said finally, "and repaying the debt I owe Maka and all of you for saving our lives." Akacheta studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps Maka right about you," he conceded grudgingly. "Time will tell." With that cryptic statement, he moved away to oversee the warriors' preparations. Darkness fell completely as the tribe began its exodus from the valley. They traveled in near silence, the only sounds the soft footfalls of horses and the occasional creak of loaded travois. Emma rode behind Maka. As instructed, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, her pregnant belly pressed uncomfortably against his back. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars scattered like frost across the black sky. Their breath formed clouds of vapor that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. Emma could see Winona riding nearby, Timmy secured in front of her, wrapped in thick furs against the cold. They traveled steadily through the night, stopping only for brief rests to water the horses and allow the walking tribal members to catch their breath. Emma marveled at their stamina, at the quiet efficiency with which they navigated the darkness. There were no complaints, no arguments about direction or pace, just a unified purpose that carried them forward mile after mile. As they traveled, Emma found herself reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation with Lieutenant Foster had been terrifying, but also unexpectedly enlightening. She had glimpsed, perhaps for the first time, how the world looked from the Lakota perspective. the constant suspicion, the arbitrary power exercised by authorities, the need to justify one's very existence. She thought of the silver locket in Foster's pocket, her locket with Robert's lock of hair secured inside. The loss of it was a physical ache, yet another severing of ties to her old life. But perhaps that severance was necessary. She was no longer simply Emma Wilson, widow of Robert, mother of Timmy. She was becoming someone new, someone who understood the world in ways Emma Wilson never could have. "You are quiet," Mahaka observed during one of their brief rest stops, "thinking of Soldier and his questions." Emma nodded, accepting the water skin he offered. "He didn't believe us," she said softly. "And he has my locket, something precious to me from my husband." Mahaka's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held understanding. "Material things can be replaced," he said. "Lives cannot." "I know," Emma agreed. "It's just—" She hesitated, searching for words to express the complex emotions swirling within her. "That locket was my last connection to Robert, to who I was before." Mahaka studied her thoughtfully. "Sometimes Great Spirit takes what we cling to," he said finally, "forces us to open hands to receive new gifts." The simple wisdom of his statement resonated deeply. Emma had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her security, and now even the small memento she had carried from that life. Yet in that emptying, she had gained things she never expected: newfound courage, genuine friendship, a broader understanding of the world and her place in it. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," she said quietly. Their journey resumed. The tribe moving like shadows across the moonlit landscape. They climbed steadily now, leaving the relative flatness of the valley for the rugged foothills that led toward the Black Hills. The terrain grew more challenging, forcing them to proceed in single file along narrow game trails. Near dawn, they reached their destination, a series of caves set into a dramatic limestone ridge. The largest opening was barely visible, concealed by a natural arrangement of boulders and scrub pine that would hide it from casual observation. Smaller cave entrances dotted the ridgeline, connected internally according to Winona's whispered explanation. Mahaka raised his hand, signaling the tribe to halt. He dismounted and helped Emma down, her body stiff and aching from the long night's ride. Timmy, miraculously, had slept through most of the journey, waking only now as Winona lifted him from her horse. "Mama!" he called, running to Emma with the boundless energy of childhood. "We're in the mountains." "Shh," Emma cautioned, though she couldn't help smiling at his excitement. "Yes, we're in a special place, the sacred caves." Timmy's eyes widened. "Like the story Chayton told me, with the spirit bear?" Emma glanced questioningly at Winona, who smiled. "Old legend," she explained. "Spirit bear who protects lost children. Chayton loves this story." As the tribe began the process of establishing their new camp within and around the caves, Emma was struck by how different this location was from the valley. The caves offered natural shelter, their interiors surprisingly warm compared to the biting cold outside. But they were cramped, requiring careful organization of people and supplies. There would be no individual lodges here. Everyone would live in much closer quarters until it was safe to establish a more traditional camp elsewhere. Nuna directed the arrangement of the interior spaces, designating areas for sleeping, cooking, and storage according to some system of organization that Emma didn't fully understand, but respected nonetheless. Pregnant women, young children, and elders were given the most comfortable spots deeper within the main cave, where the temperature remained most stable. By mid-morning, a semblance of order had been established. No exterior fires were permitted. Smoke might give away their location. But small, well-ventilated cooking fires had been carefully established in specific chambers where the smoke would disperse through natural chimneys in the rock, Emma helped where she could, though her advanced pregnancy limited her mobility in the cramped spaces. She found herself assigned to food preparation alongside several older women, including Nuna, who quietly corrected her technique when necessary, but otherwise seemed to accept her presence without comment. As she worked, Emma overheard the warriors discussing the scouts' reports. The soldiers had indeed returned to the abandoned campsite, arriving shortly after dawn with a larger force as Maka had predicted. They had searched the area thoroughly, finding nothing but the cold fire pits and trampled snow where the teepees had stood. According to the hidden Lakota observers, Lieutenant Foster had been visibly angry, ordering his men to fan out and search for tracks. "They will not find us here," Maka assured his people when the news circulated through the cave. "Snow began before dawn, covering our trail. By now, all signs of our passing are gone." A collective sense of relief spread through the gathered tribe. They had escaped, at least for now. The caves would provide shelter until it was safe to move again, perhaps to their spring hunting grounds once the worst of winter had passed. As the day progressed, Emma found herself marveling at the Lakota's adaptability. What would have been a crisis of epic proportions for most settler families, sudden displacement in the dead of winter was met with practical efficiency and even occasional humor. Children adapted their games to the new environment. Women established new work routines. Men organized hunting parties to supplement their supplies. By evening, the caves had been transformed into a functional living space. Sleeping areas were demarcated by arranged furs and blankets, cooking and crafting stations established, even a small central area cleared for community gatherings. It was cramped compared to the valley camp, but there was an intimacy to it that fostered closer connections. After the evening meal, Maka called a council meeting in the main chamber. All adults attended, sitting in a circle around a small, carefully tended fire. Even Emma was motioned to join, seated between Winona and another woman who had shown her kindness in recent days. "We are safe for now," Maka began, his deep voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. "But we must discuss what comes next." Akacheta spoke first. "How long can we stay here? Supplies will not last forever." "Until snow melts on southern passes," Maka replied. "Then we move to spring hunting grounds early." Nuna raised a gnarled hand. "Sacred caves protect us, but they demand respect. Old rituals must be observed while we shelter here." Maka nodded agreement. "Nuna will instruct on proper observances. All must participate." The discussion continued, covering practical matters of food rationing, water collection, and security protocols. Emma listened attentively, understanding more of the Lakota language now, but still relying on Winona's occasional whispered translations. Then, unexpectedly, Maka turned the council's attention to her. "Hantaiwi's child comes soon," he announced. "Within one moon cycle. We must prepare." Emma felt a flush of self-consciousness as all eyes turned to her. Her pregnancy, which had been simply one aspect of her identity in the larger camp, suddenly seemed much more significant in these confined quarters. Nuna spoke, her voice carrying surprising strength despite her age. "Child born in sacred caves carries special blessing, great honor, great responsibility." Murmurs ran through the gathering, some appreciative, others clearly concerned. Emma understood their worry. A childbirth was always dangerous, especially in winter, especially in these primitive conditions. The possibility of complications, of a difficult labor, of a newborn's fragile health, all were magnified by their circumstances. "I don't want to be a burden," Emma said quietly, addressing the council directly for the first time. "Or to bring bad spirits to your sacred place." Nuna fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Not for you to decide what spirits bring or take. Great Spirit places you here for reason. Child comes when child ready, not before, not after." Maka nodded agreement. Nuna and women will prepare for birth. All will be well. His simple confidence was reassuring, though Emma remained anxious. She had given birth to Timmy in the comfort of the cabin at Pinewood Homestead, with a midwife from a neighboring farm in attendance. This would be vastly different. A birth in a cave, surrounded by people who had been strangers mere days ago, with only traditional Lakota medicine to rely on. Yet as she looked around the circle at the faces illuminated by firelight, Emma realized these people were no longer strangers. They had sheltered her, protected her, taught her their ways. They had moved their entire camp to ensure her safety and that of her children. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The council concluded with a prayer led by Nuna, the melodic Lakota words rising to the cave ceiling like smoke. Though Emma couldn't understand every word, she felt included in its embrace, part of something larger than herself. As the tribe settled for the night, arranging themselves in family groups around the cave, Winona helped Emma prepare a sleeping area for herself and Timmy. The boy was already drowsy, the excitement of the day's journey and new surroundings finally catching up to him. "Mama," he murmured as she tucked him beneath warm furs. "Are we going to live in the caves forever?" Emma smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "No, sweetheart, just until it's safe to move again." "I like it here," Timmy said, his voice slurring with approaching sleep. "It's like being inside a bear's den. Chayton says the spirit bear might visit me in my dreams." Emma smiled, grateful for his childish acceptance of their circumstances. "Then you should sleep and see if he comes." Timmy nodded, his eyes already closing. "Good night, Mama. Good night, baby sister," he added, reaching out to touch Emma's belly briefly before sleep claimed him completely. Emma froze, startled by his words. She and Robert had never told Timmy the baby might be a girl. They hadn't known themselves. Yet he had spoken with such certainty. "Children often know things we do not," Winona said softly, having overheard the exchange. "They see with clearer eyes." "Do you think," Emma began, then hesitated. "Do you think he's right? That it's a girl?" Winona smiled. "We will know soon enough. Now rest. Tomorrow brings new challenges." As Winona moved away to her own sleeping area, Emma settled as comfortably as she could, one hand resting protectively on her belly. The baby was active tonight, moving and kicking as if responding to the excitement of the day. "A girl," Emma whispered, testing the idea. "Your brother seems to think so." The concept brought an unexpected wave of emotion. If the baby was indeed a girl, she would be born into a world utterly different from what Emma had envisioned when she first felt life quickening within her. Not on a settler homestead with a father's proud smile and a community of neighbor women, bringing gifts, but in a sacred cave, surrounded by a people not her own by birth, but who had become her people by choice and circumstance. Would that be a blessing or a curse? Emma wasn't sure. But as she drifted towards sleep, Nuna's words echoed in her mind. "Child born in sacred caves carries special blessing, great honor, great responsibility." Whatever that meant, whatever lay ahead, Emma was beginning to trust that the path unfolding before her, however unexpected, was the one she was meant to walk. The days in the cave settlement fell into a rhythm of their own. Without the sun's direct presence to mark the hours, time seemed to flow differently, measured instead by the routine activities of the community, the regular patrols of the scouts, the shared meals and evening storytelling sessions. Emma's pregnancy advanced visibly now, her body preparing for the imminent birth. The constant activity of the baby within her suggested a strong, healthy child, which brought both relief and anxiety. A difficult birth in these conditions would be dangerous, but the Lakota women, particularly Nuna and Winona, showed no concern. "Strong mother, strong child," Nuna declared after examining Emma one morning. "All proceeds as should." Preparations for the birth had begun in earnest. A small chamber adjoining the main cave had been designated as the birthing space, furnished with clean furs and supplies gathered by the tribe's women. Special herbs were collected and prepared, prayers offered, protective charms created under Nuna's direction. Emma was touched by the care being taken, by the way the entire tribe participated in these preparations. Among the settlers, childbirth was women's business, conducted privately and spoken of in hushed tones. Here, it was acknowledged as a community event, something that concerned and involved everyone. Timmy had fully integrated into the children's group, spending his days in elaborate games that required little in the way of toys or equipment, just imagination and the cave's many nooks and crannies. His Lakota vocabulary expanded daily, and he often served as translator for Emma when she struggled with complex instructions. One evening, about a week into their cave dwelling, a scout returned with unexpected news. The army patrol that had been searching for them had withdrawn completely from the area, returning to Fort Hastings. "They believe we have gone north to join larger Lakota band," Maka explained to the gathered tribe. "Winter makes further search difficult for them." A cautious sense of relief spread through the community. The immediate danger had passed. Though no one suggested returning to the valley camp, the caves had proven secure and surprisingly comfortable, and with the deepest part of winter still ahead, remaining in this natural shelter made strategic sense. For Emma, the news brought a different kind of relief. If the soldiers had truly abandoned their search, the need for her disguise, the darkened hair and skin, the constant vigilance about her speech and mannerisms was less critical. Not that she contemplated revealing herself, she had begun to see her Lakota identity not merely as a disguise, but as a genuine transformation, a shedding of one life for another. That night, as the tribe gathered for the evening meal, Maka announced another piece of news. A hunting party would depart the next day, taking advantage of the soldiers' departure to seek fresh game. "The stars show a break in weather coming," he explained. "Good hunting time before next storm." The announcement was met with enthusiasm. Their supplies, while adequate, would benefit greatly from fresh meat. The hunt would also allow the men to range farther than the cautious patrols had permitted, perhaps bringing news of other Lakota bands in the region. To Emma's surprise, Maka approached her after the meal, drawing her aside for a private conversation. "Tomorrow," he said. "Without preamble, hunters go out. I go with them." Emma nodded, unsure why he was telling her specifically. "I hope the hunting is good. We'll be gone perhaps 3 days," Maka continued. "Maybe 4 if storm comes early." He hesitated, then added, "Wanted you to know, in case child decides to come while I am away." The personal nature of his concern caught Emma off guard. "I'm sure everything will be fine," she said automatically. "Nuna says the baby isn't due for at least another week." Maka's expression remained serious. "Babies follow own time, not what we plan." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden medallion on a leather cord. "For you," he said, holding it out. "Protection, charm for mother and child." Emma accepted it with surprise, turning the medallion over in her palm. Intricate designs had been carved into the wood, symbols she didn't recognize but could feel held significance. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you." "Wear until child comes," Maka instructed. "Then place in cradle board for protection." Emma slipped the cord over her head, the medallion resting against her chest. The wood felt warm against her skin, as if it held some inner heat of its own. "I will," she promised. Maka nodded, satisfied. He turned to go, then paused. "Emma," he said, using her true name for the first time in days, "you have shown great courage. Your children are fortunate." Before she could respond, he had moved away, rejoining the hunters who were discussing the next day's plans. Emma stood still, the medallion a comforting weight against her chest, his words echoing in her mind. That night's sleep proved elusive. The baby was unusually active, shifting and kicking as if participating in some private dance. Emma lay awake, watching the shadows cast by the night fire on the cave ceiling, listening to the gentle breathing of Timmy beside her and the various sounds of the sleeping tribe. Her thoughts turned to Robert, as they often did in quiet moments. What would he think of where she had ended up? The man she had married had been kind but conventional, a settler to his core, with all the prejudices and preconceptions that entailed. Would he understand the choices she had made, the person she was becoming? She would never know that life was gone, severed as completely as if it had happened to someone else entirely. Yet she carried parts of it with her still, in Timmy's, features that sometimes echoed his father's, in the memories that surfaced unexpectedly, in the habits and knowledge she had brought from that world into this one. And soon, very soon, there would be another child, a bridge between worlds, born of one life but raised in another, a Lakota child in all but blood, who would never know the settler existence that had shaped her mother. Emma placed her hand on her belly, feeling the strong movements within. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "whatever awaits you, know that you are loved. By me, by your brother, and by the people who have become our family." As if in response, the baby gave a particularly vigorous kick. Emma smiled in the darkness, a sense of peace gradually settling over her. Whatever came next, be it birth, danger, joy, or hardship, she would face it with the strength she had discovered within herself and the support of the community that had claimed her as their own. She was no longer simply surviving. She was, at last, beginning to live again. The hunting party had been gone for 2 days when Emma's labor began. It started as a dull ache in her lower back, familiar enough from Timmy's birth that she recognized the signs immediately. She was helping prepare the morning meal when the first real contractions seized her, strong enough to make her pause mid-task, her hand instinctively moving to support her belly. Winona noticed immediately. "It begins," she said, not a question, but a simple observation. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath as the contraction eased. "Yes, but it's early still. First babies usually come slowly." Nuna, who had been grinding herbs nearby, looked up sharply. "This not first baby," she corrected. "Body remembers way. Will come faster than you think." The elder's prediction proved accurate. By midday, Emma's contractions were coming regularly, their intensity increasing rapidly. Winona and Kimimala guided her to the prepared birthing chamber, while other women took charge of Timmy, distracting him with stories and games to keep his worry at bay. The small chamber had been transformed. In recent days, soft furs lined the floor, creating a comfortable place for Emma to walk, kneel, or lie as needed. Bundles of sacred herbs hung from the ceiling, their gentle aroma filling the space. Small clay pots contained water, medicinal teas, and other preparations Nuna had insisted were essential. "Different from white woman birth?" Winona asked as she helped Emma change into a loose birthing dress. Emma nodded, pausing as another contraction built and crested. "Settler women usually lie flat," she explained when she could speak again. "Often tied down." Winona looked horrified. "Tied? Why?" "They say it's proper," Emma replied, the absurdity of it striking her anew, that women shouldn't move too much or make noise. Nuna, entering with additional supplies, scoffed audibly. "Foolishness. Body knows how to birth. Must move, must sound, must work with child, not against." As her labor progressed, Emma found herself grateful for the Lakota approach. She was encouraged to walk when she felt the need, to kneel or squat when that position brought relief, to make whatever sounds came naturally as the contractions intensified. Women came and went, bringing fresh water, offering support, singing soft birthing songs that seemed to echo the rhythm of her laboring body. Time lost all meaning as Emma surrendered to the ancient process. The pain was immense, yet somehow different from what she remembered of Timmy's birth. Not easier, but more purposeful, as if her body and the child were working in harmony rather than opposition. Just as the labor reached its most intense phase, Timmy appeared suddenly at the chamber entrance, his small face tight with worry. Before anyone could redirect him, he ran to Emma's side, grabbing her hand. "Mama, are you dying?" he asked, tears welling in his eyes. Despite her pain, Emma managed a smile, squeezing his hand. "No, sweetheart, the baby is coming, that's all. It hurts, but it's a good kind of hurt, like when your legs ache after running all day." Timmy didn't look convinced. Winona knelt beside him, speaking gently. "Your mother very strong, very brave. Baby comes soon. You help by being brave too, yes?" After a moment's consideration, Timmy nodded solemnly. He pressed something into Emma's palm, the small wooden horse Chayton had given him that first day in camp. "For luck," he whispered. Emma clutched the toy, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. "Thank you, baby. Now go with Winona. I'll call you when your brother or sister arrives." As Winona led Timmy away, another contraction seized Emma, stronger than any before. Nuna moved to her side, supporting her as she instinctively shifted to a kneeling position. "Now," Nuna said simply, "child comes now." The next minutes were a blur of sensation, overwhelming pressure, burning pain, the primal urge to push. Emma surrendered completely to her body's demands, the sounds she made echoing off the cave walls. Nuna's hands were steady and sure, her voice a constant anchor of calm instruction and encouragement. With a final, powerful effort, Emma felt the baby slip from her body into Nuna's waiting hands. A moment of suspense, of breathless waiting. Then a lusty cry filled the chamber, strong and indignant. "A daughter," Nuna announced, placing the squirming, wet infant on Emma's chest. "Strong spirit, this one, born reaching for the light." Emma gazed down at her daughter, awestruck. The baby was perfect. Tiny fingers flexing, dark eyes already alert and searching, a dusting of dark hair plastered to her head. With her olive skin, darker than Timmy's had been at birth, she looked every bit a Lakota child. "Hello, little one," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." The next hours passed in a haze of exhausted joy. The afterbirth delivered without complication. Emma was helped to clean herself and change into fresh clothing, while the women ceremonially washed the newborn and wrapped her in a soft rabbit fur blanket. Timmy was brought in to meet his sister, his initial uncertainty quickly giving way to fascinated adoration. "She's so tiny," he marveled, carefully touching her miniature fingers. "What's her name, Mama?" Emma hesitated. She hadn't decided on a name, had been waiting perhaps for the moment of meeting. Looking down at her daughter's face, she knew she wanted a name that honored both the child's origins and the people who had ensured her safe arrival. "I was thinking," she said carefully, looking to Nuna, "that perhaps she should have a Lakota name, if that would be permitted." Nuna considered the request, her wizened face solemn. "Child born in sacred caves already blessed by spirits," she said finally. "Lakota name would complete blessing." The elder studied the newborn intently. "I see name for her. We copy." She looked to Emma. "It means star. Born in darkness, brings light. We copy," Emma repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right somehow, perfect for this child born in the most unexpected of circumstances. "We copy Wilson," she added softly, acknowledging the heritage that, despite everything, remained part of her daughter's identity. That evening, as Emma rested with Wikapi sleeping contentedly against her chest, the quiet atmosphere of the caves, was disrupted by sudden activity. Voices called out, footsteps approached rapidly. Emma tensed, instinctively tightening her hold on the baby. Winona appeared at the chamber entrance, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Hunting party returns," she announced, with news, Dakota wounded. Before Emma could respond, more commotion erupted. She heard Marka's voice issuing rapid instructions, the sounds of people clearing space in the main chamber. Though exhausted from childbirth, she felt compelled to understand what was happening. "Help me up," she requested, shifting Wikapi. "Carefully. I need to see." Winona looked doubtful. "You should rest. Birth just hours ago." "Please," Emma insisted. "I need to know we're safe, that the baby is safe." After a moment's hesitation, Winona helped Emma to her feet. Moving slowly, the newborn cradled securely in her arms. Emma made her way to the main chamber. The scene that greeted her was one of controlled chaos. Dakota lay on furs near the central fire, his shoulder bandaged, but blood still seeping through the wrappings. Marka knelt beside him, his expression grim as Nuna examined the wound. Other hunters stood nearby, their clothing torn and dirty, evidence of hard travel. Marka looked up, noticing Emma. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the infant in her arms. He said something to Nuna, then rose and approached Emma. "You should be resting," he said, though his gaze remained fixed on the tiny face partially visible among the furs. "What happened?" Emma asked, ignoring his concern. "Are we in danger?" Marka hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "Hunting successful," he said finally. "But on return journey we encountered white trappers, not soldiers, different kind of danger." "They attacked you?" Emma asked, horrified. "No, they did not see us," Marka clarified, "but they spoke of bounty, money for Lakota scalps. New policy from fort," they said. Emma felt sick. "Because of me? Because they think you kidnapped a settler woman." "Perhaps part of reason," Marka acknowledged. "But such things happen even without excuse." Dakota went to scout their camp after dark, was discovered, shot as he escaped. "Will he survive?" Emma asked, glancing toward the wounded warrior. "Yes, wound clean, bullet passed through." Marka's expression softened as he looked again at the baby. "You have daughter." Emma nodded, carefully adjusting the furs to give him a better view of the infant's face. Born just hours ago, Nuna helped name her Wikapi. "Star," Marka translated, a rare smile briefly lighting his features. "Good name, strong name." He reached out tentatively, then hesitated, looking to Emma for permission. Understanding his intent, Emma carefully transferred the sleeping baby into his arms. Marka held her with surprising gentleness, studying her tiny features with evident wonder. "She looks like one of us," he observed quietly. "She is one of you," Emma replied without hesitation. "If you'll have us, truly have us, not just as temporary guests." Marka looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "You wish to remain with Lakota, not return to White World when chance comes?" Emma thought of the homestead, of Rivercross, of the life she had once envisioned for herself and her children. Then she thought of what she had found here. Not just survival, but a community, a purpose, a way of living that honored strength and vulnerability alike. "This is our home now," she said simply, "if you'll allow it." Before Marka could respond, Dakota's voice rang out, surprisingly strong, despite his injury. He had raised himself on one elbow, his gaze fixed on Emma and the baby in Marka's arms. "The white woman and her children bring danger," he declared, addressing the gathered tribe rather than Emma directly. "Soldiers, bounty hunters, all will come eventually. Is this price worth paying?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Emma felt a weight of dread settling in her chest. After all this time, after all they had shared, did the tribe still see her as only a threat, a liability? But then, unexpectedly, Chaitan's mother stepped forward. "My son smiles again because of Hanska," she said firmly. "After his father died, I thought joy gone forever. Then White Boy became brother to my son. This is not small thing." Others spoke up, the elder who had taught Emma to weave, praising her quick learning, the hunter whose wounds she had treated with her knowledge of settler medicine. Even one of the young warriors who admitted her courage during the confrontation with Lieutenant Foster had impressed him. Finally, Nuna rose from Akacheta's side, commanding immediate silence by her mere presence. "I have lived many winters," she began, her voice carrying clearly despite its age-roughened quality. "Have seen many changes come to Lakota, some good, some bad. Change always brings risk." She turned to face Emma directly. "This woman chose to become one of us when she could have returned to her people. Her son learns our ways with open heart. Her daughter born in our sacred place, blessed by our spirits." She paused, her gaze sweeping the gathered tribe. "The Great Spirit does not make mistakes in who is placed in our path." The simple pronouncement carried the weight of law. Even Akacheta, after a moment's consideration, gave a reluctant nod of acceptance before easing himself back down onto the furs. Maka returned Wikapi to Emma's arms, his expression solemn, but his eyes holding something Emma had never seen there before. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. "Nuna speaks wisdom," he said, addressing his people but holding Emma's gaze. "Change comes whether we wish it or not. Better to embrace good change than fear all change." He reached out, placing a hand gently on Wikapi's head in what Emma recognized as a blessing gesture. This child belongs to two worlds. Perhaps she helps build bridge between them when time comes. Looking down at her daughter's peaceful face, Emma felt the truth of his words resonate within her. Wikapi would indeed walk between worlds, as would Timmy, as she herself was learning to do, not as intruders or outsiders, but as bridges, as translators, as proof that understanding was possible even across the deepest divides. The winter gradually released its grip on the land. Spring came tentatively at first, then with gathering confidence. Snow melting, streams swelling, the first green shoots emerging from soil long frozen. The tribe moved from the sacred caves to their traditional spring hunting grounds, establishing a new camp in a protected valley, rich with game and wild plants. Emma and her children traveled with them, no longer guests, but members of the community. Timmy ran with the other boys, his Lakota now nearly as fluent as his English, his small body toughened by outdoor life and constant activity. Wikapi thrived, growing strong on her mother's milk, cherished not only by Emma, but by the entire tribe who saw in her tiny face the promise of a different future. And Emma herself continued to transform, learning, adapting, contributing her unique knowledge and skills while absorbing the wisdom of her adopted people. The darkness of abandonment had given way to the light of belonging, of purpose found in unexpected places. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she still thought of Robert, of the homestead, of the life that had been taken from her with such cruel abruptness. But those memories no longer carried the sharp edge of grief. They were simply part of her story, one chapter that had led, however improbably, to this new beginning. One evening, as the tribe gathered around the communal fire, Makar came to sit beside Emma. Wikapi slept peacefully in her cradleboard nearby. Timmy already curled asleep among the other children after a day of vigorous play. "Spring Council. Meeting tomorrow," Maka remarked. "Other Lakota bands coming. Important discussions about future." Emma nodded. She had heard the preparations underway, understood the significance of this gathering where multiple bands would come together to address shared concerns. Will my presence cause problems? She asked directly. Maka considered. This. Some will question, he acknowledged. But they will see your children, hear how you came to us. Most will understand. He fell silent for a moment, watching the flames. Then, with characteristic directness, he continued. Council also discusses leadership, who guides people through changing times. Emma glanced at him, sensing there was more he wanted to say. And you? What do you wish for the future? Maka met her gaze steadily. I wish for Lakota to survive coming changes. Not just survive. Thrive. Keep what matters most. Adapt what must be adapted. He paused. This path easier with someone who understands both worlds. Someone like you. The implication hung in the air between them, neither spoken directly nor easily dismissed. Emma felt her breath catch, recognizing the invitation for what it was, not just acceptance, but partnership. A place at his side as the tribe navigated the turbulent waters ahead. I would be honored, she said simply, to help however I can. Maka nodded, satisfaction and perhaps something more warming his usually stoic features. He reached out, taking her hand briefly in a gesture that felt both formal and deeply personal. Emma Wilson came to us broken, abandoned, he said, quietly. Hantewi rises stronger, a mother of Lakota children, a woman of the people. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above, Emma felt the rightness of his words settle in her bones. She had indeed been reborn through fire and ice, through loss and discovery, through the kindness of those she had been taught to fear. And in that rebirth, she had found not just survival, but a life worth living, a future worth building, and a family bound not by blood, but by the stronger ties of shared purpose and mutual respect. The transformation was complete. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.